Today, I'm going to tell you a story so legendary it blurred the line between outlaw and hero, unfolding in the heart of the Wild West, where the land was merciless and legends were born in blood and dust. This was a place where survival demanded sacrifice, and where fate often chose the cruelest path. It all started with a single decision, small enough to seem harmless, yet powerful enough to challenge the army, disrupt an empire, and awaken a ghost the world feared. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1887. The dying sun washed the frontier in molten amber, stretching long shadows across the dry reaches of Crowmoor Range. Ilyra Crowmoor stood on the broad veranda of her adobe hacienda, surveying the land she ruled with a gaze honed as sharply as a freshly stropped blade. At 32, she controlled the largest cattle operation in the territory, a fact that bred equal measures of admiration and quiet hatred. "The North pasture herd's on the move," said Ashric Fenro, her foreman of 5 steady years. "Creek beds are thinning out, but if the monsoon comes early, we'll ride it through." Ilyra gave a brief nod, her face revealing nothing of the worry pressing beneath. Drought was an old enemy, and she had outlasted worse. "And the Silver Queen?" she asked. "Production's up 15% since the new pumps went in." "You called that investment right?" "I usually do," she answered evenly. On this land, mistakes cost blood and fortunes, and she had paid her share of both. Ashric shifted, dust grinding under his boots. "There's more, ma'am. Word out of Tucson." She turned fully toward him, reading the tension in his weathered features. "Say it." "Another hit. A payroll stage for the Southern Pacific. 3 men killed. Cash taken." He lowered his voice. "They're saying it was Vaelor's band." The name struck like a blow, though her expression never cracked. 5 years had passed since she'd last heard it aloud, yet it had never stopped echoing. "The Apache Ghost," Ashric added, the settlers' name for the shadow they couldn't catch. "Army doubled the bounty, $5,000. "Thank you, Ashric," she said. "Have Brack Holloway ready the carriage at dawn. I'm riding into Tucson for the Cattlemen's Association." "Escort?" "Just Brack and his shotgun." Her tone ended the discussion. When Ashric left, Ilyra sank into one of the carved rockers lining the veranda. Alone, she finally closed her eyes and let the buried memory rise. Vaelor. The name meant the one who moves unseen. She had once whispered it in a moment that never should have existed between a white woman and an Apache man. The wind shifted, carrying sage and dust. Ilyra straightened, banishing sentiment. Her husband, Dorian Crowmoor, had been gone 6 years, leaving an empire that demanded constant defense. His death had forged her into something harder. No longer an Eastern transplant, but a woman who commanded respect in a man's world. Few knew Dorian had been more partner than husband, their marriage a practical bond that served them both. Consumption had taken him slowly. She had nursed him faithfully, earning his trust and, in time, his fortune. The whispers said she'd married for money. They weren't entirely wrong, but they missed the quiet respect that had defined it. "Mrs. Crowmoor," came a gentle voice. Isela Marrow, her housekeeper, stood at the doorway. "Supper's ready, and this arrived." A telegram lay on a silver tray. Ilyra unfolded it with steady hands. "Urgent. Raid on silver shipment. Federal marshals request your presence at a security meeting tomorrow evening. Tucson Territorial Offices. Respectfully, Judge Orrin Bale." She refolded the paper. "Thank you, Isela. Have Brack prepare for an early start. We leave at first light." That night, Ilyra sat at her desk, ledgers spread before her, columns of profit earned through calculation and sacrifice. Still, her thoughts drifted to 5 years back, to a broken wagon wheel at the edge of contested land. Dorian had been bedridden at home when a tall figure stepped from the desert glare. No Army Scout's uniform, only Apache dress. She'd reached for her hidden derringer when he spoke, calm and precise. "That little gun won't help you much out here, Mrs. Crowmoor." He knew her name, and despite everything she'd been taught to fear, she hadn't been afraid. Ilyra snapped the ledger shut. That memory belonged to another life. Tomorrow she would face the marshals, tighten her defenses, and protect what was hers. If Vaelor had truly returned, he would find her changed, tempered by years of fighting for her place in a land that showed no mercy. She extinguished the lamp and crossed to the window. Moonlight turned the desert silver, almost unreal. Somewhere out there moved a man she had known only in a moment outside of time. Now an outlaw, a raider, a ghost. "Just another enemy," she murmured, drawing the curtains closed. The stagecoach jolted through the canyon road toward Tucson, dust boiling in its wake, marking the halfway point between Crowmoor Range and the city. Inside the jolting stagecoach, Ilyra Crowmoor reviewed her notes for the Cattlemen's Association meeting. She was dressed with deliberate precision. A tailored traveling suit in deep burgundy, her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat that spoke of authority rather than vanity. Across from her sat Brack Holloway, her driver and occasional bodyguard, a former slave from Georgia who had followed Dorian Crowmoor west after the war and never left her side. His weathered hands rested on a shotgun, eyes constantly sweeping the canyon walls, sliding past the windows. "Canyons always set my nerves on edge, Miss Ilyra," he said quietly. "Too many places for an ambush." "That's why we've got eyes up top," Ilyra replied, referring to the armed guard riding with the driver. Even so, a chill traced her spine. This stretch of road had been hit 3 times in as many months. Without warning, the stagecoach jerked violently to a stop, nearly throwing her from her seat. "What in heaven's—" she began. But Brack raised a hand, silencing her. Muffled shouts echoed from above, followed by a single gunshot. Then silence. "Get behind me, Miss Ilyra," Brack whispered, lifting the shotgun toward the door. The latch tore open, and sunlight flooded the cramped interior, blinding her for a heartbeat. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring down the barrel of a rifle held by a man, with his face hidden behind a dust-darkened bandana. 2 others stood behind him, masked and armed. "Step out," the first man ordered. "Slow and easy." His accent marked him as neither white nor Mexican. Brack's shotgun never wavered. "Best ride on, friend. Ain't nothing here worth dying for." "The woman comes with us," the man replied, his dark eyes shifting to Ilyra. "No one needs to die today, old man." "I can't allow that," Brack said, finger tightening on the trigger. Ilyra placed a steady hand on his arm. "It's all right, Brack. Lower the gun." "Miss Ilyra, do as I say." Her voice was calm, unyielding. "If they wanted us dead, we'd already be lying in the dust." After a long breath, Brack lowered the shotgun. "A wise choice," the masked man said, stepping aside to let her pass. Ilyra emerged from the stagecoach with her dignity intact. The driver and guard lay bound but alive nearby. 4 mounted riders surrounded the coach, all masked, all armed. "If it's money you want," she began. "It's not," the leader cut in, gesturing as one of his men brought forward a horse. "You'll ride with us, Mrs. Crowmoor." "And if I refuse?" The man's eyes creased slightly, hinting at a smile beneath the cloth. "You won't." There was something in his voice, the cadence, the way he shaped her name, that sent recognition crashing through her. He stepped closer, speaking so only she could hear. "For old time's sake, Ilyra, come peacefully. I don't wish harm on your people." The world seemed to tilt. Those eyes. She knew them, had seen them in dreams on nights when the weight of her empire felt like a cage. "Vaelor," she breathed. He offered his hand, helping her mount the horse. As they turned away, she called back, "Tell Judge Oren Bale I've been delayed." She met Brack's gaze. "No heroics." The old man nodded grimly, understanding. "Don't follow. Don't waste lives." The riders vanished into a narrow mountain trail, dust settling behind them as civilization slipped farther away with every mile. Ilyra kept her composure. Years of bargaining with ruthless men had taught her to bury fear and measure advantage. At the moment, she had little of either, except one truth. Her captor was no stranger. He was a ghost from her past, a man who had once saved her life, a man she had never expected to see again, and a man who, if the stories were true, had become one of the most hunted outlaws in the Arizona territory. They followed paths invisible to untrained eyes, trails known only to those who had called this unforgiving land home for generations. The ride was grueling. Ilyra said nothing, memorizing turns, distances, landmarks, weighing the men around her. The four riders moved with practiced efficiency, speaking in Apache with occasional bursts of English. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden canyon, its entrance masked by natural stone. Inside lay a small encampment, perhaps 15 souls, men, women, and several children. Not bandits, she realized. Families. Vaelor dismounted first, then helped her down, his touch restrained yet unsettlingly familiar. He still hadn't spoken to her since that whisper at the stagecoach, and the silence between them felt heavier than chains. "You'll stay here," he said at last, motioning toward a small wickiup, its frame layered with brush and canvas. "You won't be harmed." "How comforting," Ilyra Crowmoor replied, lifting her chin to meet his eyes. "And how long do you intend to keep me your prisoner, Vaelor? Or should I call you the Apache Ghost now?" Something flickered in his gaze. Regret, perhaps, or dry amusement. His eyes narrowed, the only part of his face visible beneath the bandana. With a swift motion, he pulled it down. The man revealed was both familiar and altered. At 34, Vaelor bore the marks of survival, new scars etched across hardened features, but the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes remained untouched by time. "Call me what you like," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "You'll be released when it's safe." "Safe for whom?" she pressed. "You're interfering with federal business. The marshals are expecting me." "I know." He gestured, and a young Apache woman stepped forward. "Kiri will see to your needs. I suggest you rest. We'll talk later." With that, he turned away, leaving Ilyra with the woman who indicated the wickiup with a respectful nod. Inside the shelter, Ilyra found clean blankets spread over pine boughs, a water skin, and strips of dried meat. Spare, but sufficient. She sat, steadying her thoughts, as Kiri withdrew quietly. 5 years. 5 years since that chance meeting at the edge of Apache land. 5 years since 3 days that had shifted how she saw herself. And the world. The memories returned, uninvited. A broken wagon wheel. Vaelor appearing through the desert shimmer like a vision. His unexpected help. His educated speech. The explanation. Mission schooling before he returned to his people. Then the sudden summer storm that forced them into an abandoned mining shack. 3 days of conversation that bridged impossible distances. His story. Son of a chief who had learned the white man's ways to defend his people. Hers, a banker's daughter who had married with intention and found herself mistress of a cattle empire in a land she scarcely understood. 3 days of slow, improbable connection between two colliding worlds. And the third night, when boundaries blurred beneath shared truths and mutual respect. One kiss, tentative, forbidden, electric, full of promise, interrupted by the arrival of an army patrol, a rushed farewell, a promise whispered in desperation to meet again, a promise never kept. Ilyra had returned to her ailing husband and the weight of growing responsibility. Vaelor had vanished as the army intensified its campaign against the remaining free Apache bands. Months later came rumors of his death in a skirmish. She had mourned alone, burying that brief connection deep as she reshaped herself into the formidable Mrs. Crowmoor, a woman who commanded respect across the territory. And now he stood alive before her. Changed, leader of a people who looked as much like refugees as raiders. The wickiup flap rustled, pulling her from her thoughts. Vaelor stepped inside, carrying a tin cup of coffee, which he offered without ceremony. "I imagine you have questions," he said, settling across from her. She accepted the cup, buying a moment to compose herself. "Several, starting with why you abducted the territory's largest taxpayer and employer." A trace of the smile she remembered softened his features. "Still direct. That hasn't changed." "Answer the question," Ilyra said evenly. He inclined his head, respect clear in his posture. "The meeting you were summoned to, it's a trap. Not set by the marshals, but by Colonel Varric Holt at Fort Buchanan. He's been hunting my people for months, furious over our actions. You mean your raids on payroll shipments and stagecoaches? I mean our efforts to feed people who are starving on reservations while government agents steal the supplies meant for them." His tone stayed calm, but intensity burned in his eyes. "Holt learned of your summons. He planned to use you as bait, knowing I've targeted your silver shipments before." Ilyra studied him, weighing his words against what she knew. Colonel Varric Holt's reputation for ruthless campaigns against Apache bands was well known. "Even so," she said, "why would he think you'd risk taking me? Our acquaintance was brief, years ago. I doubt anyone knows of it." Vaelor held her gaze. "Because 2 months ago, one of your foremen caught 2 of my men reclaiming seized supplies on the northern edge of your land. You ordered them released instead of handing them to the army." Her cup paused midway to her lips. "Those were your men. They told me of a tall woman with eyes like winter rain," he said quietly, "who told them, 'Tell your leader this is the only mercy I offer.'" Ilyra said nothing. The silence between them carried more weight than any chain. "Next time I'll hang thieves myself." Despite her composure, Ilyra Crowmoor felt warmth creep into her cheeks. "I didn't know they were yours." "Didn't you?" Vaelor's question lingered between them, sharp and testing. Before she could answer, voices erupted outside the wickiup. Vaelor was on his feet in an instant, hand already dropping to the pistol at his hip. A young Apache man burst through the entrance. "Riders coming from the south," he reported in his own tongue. Ilyra caught enough to understand the urgency. "How many?" Vaelor demanded, already moving. "At least 12. Army, by the look of them." Vaelor turned back to Ilyra, his expression hardening. "It seems Cole. Varric Holt is more resourceful than I expected. Your man Brack Holloway must have led them here." "Brack would never," Ilyra began, then stopped cold. "The guard on the stagecoach. He must have been one of Holt's men." Vaelor nodded once. "We move. Now." He extended his hand. "Unless you'd rather greet the colonel and explain why you're standing in an Apache camp." The meaning was unmistakable. Any hint of alliance with Apache renegades would shatter everything she had built. Ilyra took his hand and rose, the dignity she'd forged over years settling around her like armor. What about your people? Something flickered in Vaelor's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her concern. They have routes prepared. We've survived worse. Outside, the camp moved with practiced efficiency. Shelters came down. Only essentials were gathered. Children, the Cinderborn, were guided toward a narrow trail at the canyon's far end. Vaelor led Ilyra to 2 waiting horses. "Can you still ride hard?" he asked, the question echoing another time when she had startled him with her skill. "Better than most men in the territory," she replied, lifting her skirts and mounting without help. A trace of a smile touched his mouth. "That I remember." They rode fast, splitting from the fleeing ashwind kin, climbing higher into pine-studded slopes where cover was thicker. Faint sounds of pursuit drifted behind them as they paused briefly on a rocky rise to give the horses breath. "They're persistent," Ilyra observed. "Holt must want you badly." "Not just me." Vaelor scanned the horizon. "There's a bounty on any Apache found off the reservation. Alive or dead. Dead preferred." The bitterness in his voice struck her. "Is that why you raid? Revenge?" His gaze snapped to hers, fierce and unyielding. "Survival, Ilyra. When they forced us onto San Carlos, it was a death sentence. Disease, hunger, corruption. I watched children fade while agents sold the food meant for them." He turned back to the trail. "I hit payrolls and supply wagons because that money feeds my people. Every dollar buys medicine, blankets, smuggled back by those of us still able to fight." This man was not the thoughtful idealist she had met 5 years ago. That man had believed understanding could change things. This one had learned otherwise. "And your education?" she asked quietly. "Your hope of being a bridge between our worlds?" Pain flashed across his face. "That world doesn't want bridges. It wants submission, or extinction." He checked his rifle with practiced precision. "There's a place 2 miles north. We can shelter there tonight." As they prepared to ride again, a shot cracked the air, bark exploding from a tree inches from Vaelor's head. He yanked Ilyra from the saddle, dragging her behind a boulder as more shots followed. "At least 3 shooters," he said calmly, firing back with measured accuracy. "Left ridge, 200 yards." Ilyra reached for the derringer hidden in her boot, a habit she'd kept since her early days in the territory. "4 bullets won't help much," she said, echoing his words from their first meeting. Vaelor glanced at her, surprise, and something like approval in his eyes. He handed her his revolver. "You remember how to use this?" "Point and squeeze," she replied, checking the cylinder. "I've had practice since we last met." He gave a brief nod. "Cover the left approach. I'll flank them." "Wait." Ilyra caught his arm. "You're risking your life for a woman who represents everything your people have lost." "Why?" For a heartbeat, the gunfire faded, and Vaelor looked at her with an intensity that carried her back 5 years. "You know why, Ilyra Crowmoor." Before she could answer, he was gone, moving with the silent efficiency that had earned him his name. Alone behind the stone, Ilyra steadied herself, raised the revolver, and prepared to fight. She slowed her breathing, fixing her attention on the path Vaelor had marked. When a shadow shifted among the rocks, she fired twice in quick succession, forcing the would-be attacker back into cover. Minutes dragged like hours. Then, without warning, gunfire erupted from the far side of the ridge, followed by confused shouts. Vaelor had slipped around their pursuers. The exchange ended as suddenly as it began. Silence settled in, broken only by wind whispering through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. Ilyra Crowmoor stayed where she was, revolver steady, every sense alert. At last, Vaelor emerged from the rocks. A fresh cut bled along his forearm, but he was otherwise untouched. "Army scouts," he said. "An advance party. We should move before the main force arrives." "You killed them?" Ilyra asked, her voice even. "No," he answered. "I wounded one and scattered the rest. They'll be found." His eyes held hers. "Does that surprise you?" 5 years ago it wouldn't have. She handed back his revolver. "Now I'm not sure what to expect from the Apache Ghost." For a moment, something eased in his expression. "I'm still Vaelor, just with fewer illusions." He nodded toward the horses, which had stayed miraculously close despite the shots. "We've got a long ride ahead." As they mounted and pushed deeper into the mountains, Ilyra felt the careful walls around her heart begin to crack. This man, outlaw, enemy of the world she commanded, was still the only one who had ever seen past her polished armor. And despite logic, despite reputation and empire, part of her welcomed the dangerous return of feelings she'd buried beneath years of dust and duty. Night fell swiftly in the high country, the temperature dropping as darkness wrapped the slopes. Vaelor guided them to a small cave concealed behind a stand of juniper, its entrance nearly invisible, unless you knew where to look. "We'll be safe here," he said, helping her down. "The army won't keep searching at night, not in terrain like this." Inside, the cave opened into a chamber larger than it appeared. Vaelor moved with practiced ease, building a small fire in a ring of stone. The flames threw restless shadows across the walls, revealing caches tucked into natural niches, ammunition, dried food, folded blankets. "One of your hideouts," Ilyra said, removing her hat and loosening her hair. The relief was immediate, easing the tight ache behind her eyes. He nodded after tending the horses and joining her by the fire. "One of many. The mountains remember us, even when others try to erase us." He passed her a strip of jerky and a canteen. They ate quietly, the weight of shared history and present danger hanging between them. "You said I'd be released when it's safe," Ilyra said at last. "When will that be?" 2 days, maybe 3, he replied. "Once we're sure Kolert Varric Holt's men have pulled back." He studied her across the fire. "Your ranch manager, the former slave, he'll manage in your absence." "Brack Holloway can hold things together for a week," she said, surprised by his knowledge. "You've been watching my operation. I make it my business to know the forces that shape this territory," he said, a trace of dry humor surfacing. "Even those who once shared coffee with me in a mining shack during a thunderstorm." The memory broke something loose. "I thought you were dead," she said softly. "After the campaign against the last free bands, there were reports." "Exaggerated," Vaelor said. "Not without cost." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a puckered scar on his upper arm. "A parting gift from the 6th Cavalry before I crossed into Mexico." "Mexico," she echoed. "Is that where you've been all this time?" "For a while." His expression darkened. "Then the reservation. I tried to work within their system. I watched my cousin die of fever while the agent sold the medicine meant for us. I saw children starve while cattle grazed on land that was once ours." The passion in his voice was controlled but unmistakable. This was the fire that had reshaped him into a leader of resistance. "So you took matters into your own hands," Ilyra said. Not a question, but an understanding. "I chose survival," Vaelor replied. "For my people." He met her gaze directly. "Judge me if you wish, Ilyra Crowmoor. You with your thousands of acres and silver mines, an empire raised on ground where my ancestors hunted for generations." The words cut deep, but she didn't look away. "I don't deny the history, Vaelor. But I built what I have through hard work and fair dealing." Fair. Vaelor's laugh carried no warmth. Was it fair when treaty after treaty was broken? When our hunting grounds became your grazing land? When our water was diverted to feed your cattle? Heat crept into Ilyra Crowmoor's cheeks. I didn't make those decisions. I wasn't even in this territory when most of that happened. Yet you profit from them every day, Vaelor said quietly, his words unrelenting. Every acre you own, every silver dollar you count, all of it stands on broken promises and stolen ground. They faced each other across the fire. The easy understanding of their first meeting strained beneath the weight of history. Ilyra was the first to look away. Perhaps you're right, she said at last, surprising them both with her honesty. But what would you have me do? Walk away from everything I've built? Surrender the security I fought for? Vaelor studied her for a long moment. No, he said finally. I don't expect that. I've learned not to expect the impossible. The resignation in his voice struck her harder than anger would have. She remembered the man who once spoke of bridges between worlds, of shared futures. What happened to you? She asked softly. The man I met 5 years ago believed change was possible. He stirred the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. That man watched his sister die on the reservation because the promised doctor never came. He buried his nephew, barely 6, after a cavalry raid on families trying to escape sickness at San Carlos. When he looked at her again, his eyes held both grief and resolve. That man learned that words don't feed hungry children or stop bullets. The weight of his losses settled over her. I'm sorry, Ilyra said simply. Your sympathy changes nothing. His tone softened despite the words. No, she agreed, but understanding might. Silence followed, heavy and reflective, as the fire burned lower. Eventually Vaelor rose, added wood, and sat again, the flames tracing the hard lines time had carved into his face. You've changed, Ilyra Crowmoor, he said. The woman I met was still finding her place. You move now like someone who knows exactly who she is. Necessity, she replied. After Dorian Crowmoor died, I had to become harder. A woman alone in this business isn't allowed doubt. Your husband, Vaelor said, nodding. I heard. Consumption. That's right. Her hand brushed the simple gold band she still wore, not from sentiment, but as armor. He was a good man, in his way. Our marriage was practical. Not a love match, Vaelor observed. Few are, she said steadily. Dorian needed a capable partner. I needed freedom from my father's plans, and the chance to build something of my own. We respected each other. And after? A trace of his old teasing surfaced. No suitors for the richest widow in the territory? Her laugh was brief but real. More than I care to count. Ranchers, bankers, even a judge or two, all eager to help manage what Dorian left. Which was considerable. It was a beginning, she corrected. What exists now, I built. Pride edged her voice. The original ranch was 10,000 acres. Crowmoor Range now spans nearly 50,000, with 3 working silver mines and the largest breeding stock operation in the territory. Vaelor regarded her with renewed interest. Impressive. And not everyone appreciates a woman holding that kind of power. Their appreciation doesn't matter, she said with a shrug. Their respect does, and respect comes from strength and success. A belief we share, he said quietly. He offered her a blanket from his supplies. You should rest. Tomorrow will bring its own trials. Ilyra accepted it, suddenly aware of her fatigue. As she settled near the fire, the question she'd been holding finally surfaced. The children in your camp, she said, her voice low. Are any of them yours? Vaelor looked up from checking his rifle, genuine surprise crossing his face. No, he said after a beat. There has been no wife, no children. The question he didn't answer lingered between them. Why? Neither of them reached for it. Good night, Vaelor, Ilyra Crowmoor said instead, turning back toward the fire. Rest well, Ilyra Crowmoor, he replied. His voice carried a softness she barely remembered. Dawn arrived with the distant thunder of hooves. Vaelor was awake in an instant, moving to the mouth of the cave with rifle raised. Ilyra joined him, having slept in her clothes and boots out of hard-earned habit. Cavalry patrol, he said grimly. At least 20 riders along the valley floor. Ilyra leaned past him, spotting the dust plume glowing in the early light. They're moving northwest, away from us, for now. Vaelor didn't relax. They'll spread out, set a search pattern. Kalmordverik Holt is thorough, if nothing else. What's your plan? She asked, already rolling her blanket. North, deeper into the mountains, then east toward the reservation line. He broke camp with practiced efficiency, wiping away every sign they'd been there. I have contacts who can send word to your ranch that you're alive. Ilyra paused. And then? Then you return to your empire, he said evenly. And I return to mine. Something in his eyes contradicted the simplicity of his words. An empire of outlaws and refugees, she said, not unkindly. We prefer freedom fighters, Vaelor replied, a flicker of dry humor surfacing. They saddled the horses in silence, last night's tension giving way to the sharp focus of survival. As he helped her mount, his hands lingered briefly at her waist. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the cold morning air. They rode on, following game trails so faint Ilyra would never have found them alone. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the territory below, mountains falling away into foothills, then the wide sweep of rangeland that included her holdings. Your domain, Vaelor said, following her gaze. From up here it looks smaller. Still large enough to draw enemies? Ilyra replied. Not just you and your raiders. Texas cattle barons circling my water rights. Mining interests eager to take the Silver Queen. Vaelor studied her with new understanding. You fight your own war. Different stakes, she said. But yes. She met his eyes. We're not as different as you think, Vaelor. We both protect what's ours, by whatever means we have. Before he could answer, a rifle shot cracked the air. The bullet struck stone near Vaelor's horse. The animal screamed and reared as more shots followed. Ambush! Vaelor shouted, yanking Ilyra from the saddle. They dove behind a fallen log as bark exploded around them. 5, maybe 6 shooters, he assessed, firing back with controlled precision. Not soldiers. Black spurmen, by the look of it. Ilyra drew her derringer, scanning for movement. They've been tracking us since the cave. A round tore across Vaelor's shoulder, ripping cloth and drawing blood. He didn't slow. One attacker went down with a cry, tumbling into the rocks below. We have to move, he said, checking his ammunition. They're flanking from the east. Ilyra's mind raced. The ravine to the right. Too open, Vaelor cut in. We'd be exposed the whole way down. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the terrain. Years of holding ground in hostile country sharpened her judgment. The horses are gone, she said, but if we draw them west, we can slip north through the pines. Vaelor glanced at her, impressed. How? Instead of answering, Ilyra pulled a small silver flask from her boot. Whiskey, she said, and your bandana. Understanding clicked. Vaelor tore a strip of cloth free. She soaked it in whiskey, stuffed it into the flask, leaving a tail hanging out. On my count, she said, producing a match. 1, 2, 3. She struck the match, lit the cloth, and hurled the flask into dry brush on the western slope. Vaelor laid down cover fire as the glass shattered, flames roaring to life and smoke billowing upward. Shouts erupted among the attackers. Using the chaos, Ilyra and Vaelor sprinted for the northern tree line, low and fast. Bullets followed, but smoke and confusion ruined the aim. They vanished into the pines, pushing deeper until the sounds of pursuit faded. Only when the forest swallowed them did they stop, breathing hard. That, Vaelor said between gasps, was not something they taught at the mission school. Ilyra Crowmoor allowed herself a faint smile. And certainly not at Miss Porter's Academy for Young Ladies. Her gaze dropped to Vaelor's shoulder, where blood darkened the fabric. That needs tending. Later, he said firmly. We're still too exposed. His eyes swept the trees. There's a place, about 2 miles, a hidden basin with a spring. We can lie low there. They moved on foot, the trek harder without horses but far safer beneath the forest canopy, where no dust rose and no clear trail betrayed them. Despite the wound, Vaelor set a relentless pace. Ilyra kept up without complaint, her riding boots proving well suited to rock and root. By late afternoon, they reached the valley he'd promised. It was a pocket of green cradled between sheer cliffs, fed by a clear spring that spilled over mossy stone into a shallow pool. It's beautiful, Ilyra murmured. An old Apache refuge, Vaelor said, kneeling to drink and splash water on his face. Few outsiders know it exists. Yet you brought me here, she said, joining him at the water's edge. He met her eyes, something unreadable settling in his gaze. You're not an outsider, Ilyra. Not anymore. The words lingered between them, marking a space neither enemy nor ally quite covered. Ilyra broke the moment with a practical nod. Let me see your shoulder. After a brief pause, Vaelor nodded and pulled off his shirt. The graze across his upper shoulder was painful, but clean. As she rinsed it with spring water, Ilyra noticed the web of old scars crossing his chest, each one a testament to survival. The Black Spur men, she said quietly as she worked. They were after you, not me. The Apache Ghost brings $5,000, Vaelor confirmed, dead or alive. A sizable sum, Ilyra said, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bandage him. About the price of one of my prize bulls, from what I hear. His attempt at humor never reached his eyes. Ilyra's hands paused. Is that how you see me? As someone who weighs lives against livestock? Vaelor exhaled slowly, last night's anger easing into something heavier. No, I've watched you long enough. You treat your people fairly. Mexican, white, black. You judge by work, not birth. Yet you judge me for the land I hold, she said, finishing the bandage. I judge the system that stole it, he corrected. You are a complication. A complication, she repeated, tying a neat knot. Is that all I am to you, Vaelor? He turned fully toward her. In the hush of the valley, the distance between them felt suddenly fragile. What would you rather be, Ilyra Crowmoor? The question hovered, weighted with everything they had never said in 5 long years. Then Vaelor stiffened. A faint jingle of tack, hooves muffled by soil. Riders, he whispered. At least 4, maybe more. They slipped beneath an overhanging slab of rock as 6 mounted men appeared at the far end of the basin. Civilian clothes, mixed weapons. Not soldiers, Vaelor said grimly. They stayed on our trail. $5,000 inspires devotion, Ilyra replied, studying them. The one in front, I know him. Jet Blackmore, former army tracker turned bounty hunter. Dangerous. Vaelor glanced at her. You know him? I make it my business to know dangerous men, she said evenly, especially those who threaten my interests. An idea took shape, reckless but promising. They don't know I'm with you, she said slowly. They're hunting the Apache Ghost, not Ilyra Crowmoor. Realization dawned in Vaelor's eyes. No, he said at once. Whatever you're planning. I'll draw them, she went on. You circle wide, maybe even take their horses. It's too dangerous. These men respect money and power, she cut in, and fear those who command both. He studied her, torn. Why help me? I took you. I disrupted your business. I put you in danger. The question stopped her short. The answer was layered with memory, regret, and something she'd never named. Because 5 years ago, she said quietly, you taught me to see this land, and its people, differently, and because I'm not ready to watch you die. Before he could reply, she stepped out from cover. Her hair had fallen loose, her traveling suit torn and dust-streaked, yet her posture radiated authority. She walked forward like a woman accustomed to obedience. Jet Blackmore, Ilyra called, her voice carrying across the valley. You're trespassing on Crowmoor Range grazing rights. The black spur men pulled their reins hard, surprise rippling through the group as recognition set in. Ilyra Crowmoor was not a woman one expected to encounter alone in a hidden valley. Jet Blackmore recovered first, tipping his hat in a gesture that stopped just shy of respect. Mrs. Crowmoor, he drawled. This is unexpected. We're tracking the Apache Ghost and his outfit. You seen any sign of them? Ilyra advanced a few measured steps, never closing the distance enough to invite familiarity. I've been inspecting potential grazing expansion, she said evenly. A mountain lion spooked my horse this morning. I've been on foot since. Blackmore's eyes narrowed. All alone, ma'am? That seems unlikely for a woman of your standing. My men are working the western ridge, she replied without pause. We were meant to meet here by sundown. Her glance slid briefly to the lowering sun. They'll be arriving shortly, with rifles. The message landed. Blackmore shifted in his saddle, weighing the bounty against the trouble of crossing the most powerful rancher in the territory, along with the legal and social fallout that would follow. We tracked the Apache and a companion into this valley, he insisted, though the confidence had thinned. Then they've already moved on, Ilyra said coolly. I'd appreciate an escort back to my crew, seeing as you've disrupted my work. As she spoke, she kept her peripheral vision sharp. From rock to tree, a shadow slid silently behind the mounted men, circling wide. Vaelor was moving exactly as planned. Blackmore hesitated. Maybe we wait for your hands to show, he suggested. It's curious, finding you here where the Apache Ghost passed through. Ilyra met his stare, heart hammering but posture unbroken. Are you implying I consort with outlaws, Mr. Blackmore? That's a serious charge, especially against someone with influence at the governor's office. The mention of Gov. Malric Dorn struck home. Blackmore's jaw tightened, but he backed off a fraction. No accusation, Mrs. Crowmoor, just doing my job. As am I, she replied. Now about that escort. A rifle cracked. The shot tore into the dirt near the horse's hooves. 2 more followed, precise and deliberate. The animals reared, chaos erupting instantly. Ambush! One man shouted, drawing his pistol as the others scattered. Ilyra dropped flat, rolling behind a boulder as bullets started flying in every direction. Vaelor's diversion was perfect, but it left her in the middle of it. From cover, she saw him moving with lethal economy, using rock and brush as if the land itself guided him. One man went down under the butt of his rifle. Another fell screaming, a shot clean through the leg. Jet Blackmore, however, kept his head, slipping behind a stone shelf with a clear angle on Vaelor. As Blackmore raised his rifle and settled his aim, Ilyra didn't hesitate. She fired her derringer. The small report vanished beneath the heavier gunfire, but the shot clipped Blackmore's arm, spoiling his aim and forcing him to duck back. That heartbeat was enough. Vaelor flowed through the fading light, a shadow among shadows, and appeared behind Blackmoor as if summoned by the stone itself. The struggle was brief, a sharp blow, perfectly placed, and Blackmoor collapsed, unconscious. Minutes later, it was over. 2 bounty hunters lay wounded but alive. The rest had fled or been disarmed. Vaelor swept up weapons and ammunition, then approached Ilyra. "That," he said quietly, "was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen." She rose, brushing dust from her skirt with deliberate calm. "In my experience, those tend to be the same thing." A rare smile crossed Vaelor's face, erasing years of hard lines for a fleeting moment. "You shot Blackmoor." "I'm a better shot than most assume," Ilyra said, reloading her derringer with practiced ease. "A woman alone learns certain skills." His expression sobered. "You saved my life, Ilyra Crowmoor. That creates a debt in my people's way." "Consider it payment," she said, not meeting his eyes. "For 5 years ago, when you helped a stranded woman with a broken wheel." He shook his head. "This was more than that, and you know it." He gestured toward the bounty hunters' horses, now clustered at the far end of the valley. "We should move before they wake or more arrive." They mounted, Ilyra riding side-saddle this time, her torn skirt leaving little choice. As they rode out under the deepening dusk, she felt something shift between them. Captive and captor, rancher and outlaw. Those lines had blurred into something far more dangerous. They rode in silence until night fully claimed the mountains. When they finally stopped in a narrow ravine, the simple acts of securing horses and building a smokeless fire filled the space between them. Only after a sparse meal of jerky and hard biscuit from the Black Spur men's saddlebags did Vaelor finally break the silence. "Why did you truly help me today, Ilyra?" he asked. His voice stayed low, steady, shaped by the dark pressing in around them. "This time, tell me the whole truth." Ilyra kept her eyes on the dying coals, drawing a slow breath. The answer she'd given before had been honest, but only part of it. The rest was a truth she rarely allowed herself to touch. "5 years ago," she said at last, "after we went our separate ways, I went back to being Mrs. Dorian Crowmoor, a proper wife, a woman learning how to survive in a man's business." Her voice didn't waver. "I sat beside my husband through his last months with consumption. I grew the ranch. I became who you see now." She lifted her gaze to him across the fire. "But those 3 days in that mining shack changed something I could never put back where it belonged." "What changed?" Vaelor asked quietly, the fire whispering between them. "I learned to see the land and the people on it through different eyes," Ilyra said. "I saw a man who walked between worlds, who understood both, yet belonged fully to neither." She hesitated, then continued. "I felt a connection I had never known, not even in my marriage." The words hung there, heavier than she'd intended, impossible to take back. Vaelor's face revealed nothing in the shifting light. "And now," he asked, "what do you see when you look at me? Not the scout from 5 years ago, but the outlaw with a price on his head." "I see a man fighting so his people can live," she answered without pause. "A leader who risks himself to feed children who are not his. A warrior who shows restraint when killing would be easier." Her eyes held his. "I see you, Vaelor. Changed, sharpened by loss, but still the man who helped a stranded woman when he had no reason to." The space between them seemed to fold inward, time loosening its grip. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Ilyra asked softly. Vaelor studied her for a long moment. "I see strength that doesn't depend on cruelty, power used with purpose." His voice dropped, I see the woman who followed me through 5 years of deserts, mountains, and borders I could never cross. The silence that followed was full, not empty. Vaelor rose and moved closer, settling beside her with a smooth ease that betrayed the pain in his shoulder. 5 years ago, he said, we were interrupted. Her breath caught as his fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The touch carried years of restraint and roads not taken. We still stand on opposite sides, she whispered, though she leaned closer. A divide that can't be crossed. Or maybe, Vaelor murmured, his hand resting against her cheek. We are the crossing. When their lips met, it wasn't hurried or uncertain. It carried the weight of years apart, of choices made and paths split. It was a moment outside time, acknowledging what had been denied, without pretending the world beyond it would change. At first light, they were already riding again. Sunrise painted the land in gold as they moved side by side, speaking little, guarding the memory of the night with silence. Vaelor turned them east, along game trails and old Apache paths that led toward the reservation, and the end of what they shared. There's a trading post 10 miles on, he said as they paused to rest the horses. Calixomora runs it, fair man. He can send word to your ranch. Ilyra nodded, adjusting her torn skirt. Will you keep raiding? The question held no judgment. Vaelor's gaze drifted. Until my people can eat, until treaties mean something. Then he looked back at her. You and I both know that day may never come. There has to be another way, Ilyra said quietly. Courts, Washington. We tried, he replied gently. Delegations return with promises and paper. His jaw tightened. Meanwhile, children starve. They die from sickness white doctors could cure. She understood now, not as theory, but as lived truth, why he fought the way he did. What if, Ilyra began, then stopped, the idea still rough in her mind. What? Vaelor pressed, his sharp eyes fixed on her face. She chose her words with care. What if there were a way to keep your people fed without risking lives on raids? A lawful arrangement. A business channel that moves food and medicine into the reservation. Interest flickered across his features, quickly tempered by doubt. The agents control everything that goes in. Any official aid disappears before it reaches our families. Not if it moves through private routes, Ilyra countered. The Crowmoor Range holds contracts across the territory. Shipments can be redirected, quietly. You would endanger your name, your operation, for Apache lives. His tone carried no accusation, only honest curiosity. I would protect people in need while protecting my interests, she said evenly. Your raids on payrolls and silver hurt my business, Vaelor. This would help both sides. A trace of his old smile surfaced. There it is, the businesswoman. Everything is a negotiation with you, Ilyra Crowmoor. Life is negotiation, she replied without apology. And this one could save lives. Apache and white. Vaelor weighed the thought in silence. Such an agreement would require trust. And a neutral hand, Ilyra said. Calixomora. He trades fairly with both sides. He could serve as the intermediary. The idea hovered between them. Delicate, dangerous, but real. A possible bridge where none had existed. Before Vaelor could answer, hoofbeats cut through the air. Both turned, scanning the ridge. A single rider came hard from the east. One of yours? Ilyra asked, noticing Vaelor's sudden ease. He nodded. Rauk, my second. I sent him to check on the Ashwind kin after the army sweep. The young Apache pulled up sharply, urgency etched on his face as he spoke in rapid Apache. Ilyra caught enough to sense the gravity. Vaelor's jaw tightened, anger held on a short leash. When Rauk finished, Vaelor turned back to her, switching to English. Vaelor Holt has taken hostages from the reservation. Ilyra stiffened. Hostages? 3 elders, 2 children, he said grimly. He claims they tried to leave without permission. Rauk says they were dragged from their homes. Vaelor's voice stayed level, but urgency burned beneath it. Holt says if I do not surrender within 3 days, they'll be tried as hostile combatants. They both understood what that meant. Trials in name only, followed by execution or a slow death in confinement. Ilyra had heard enough about Holt's methods to know this was deliberate cruelty. He can't do that, she said, though the words sounded thin. He already has, Vaelor replied. They're being held at Fort Buchanan. He hesitated, then added, One of the elders is Senai, my father's brother, a healer. The children are his grandchildren. The revelation explained everything. This wasn't strategy alone. It was blood. Ilyra's thoughts raced, then settled. I'm going with you. Vaelor turned on her, disbelief plain on his face. No, this is no longer about silver or trade. This is Apache business. It's territorial business, she corrected. Holt has overstepped his authority. As a major landholder and taxpayer, I have standing to challenge him. You would risk your position, your name, for Apache captives? He asked, the question sharper now. I would challenge military abuse under the law, Ilyra said firmly. And yes, I would stop the killing of innocents, including children. Rauk watched the exchange in open astonishment. He spoke again to Vaelor in Apache, quick and questioning, clearly unsettled by the white woman's resolve. Vaelor's reply was brief, but not dismissive. After a short exchange in Apache, he turned back to Ilyra. Rauk reminds me that a powerful white ally could shift the balance, he admitted, but it puts you directly against Vaelor Holt. That is a dangerous man to cross. I've crossed dangerous men before, Ilyra said calmly, the certainty of experience in her voice. And unlike you, I can walk through the front gate of Fort Buchanan without being thrown in irons. The logic was unassailable. Vaelor studied her for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Then we need a plan, he said, one that doesn't end with all of us hanging from Holt's gallows. 3 days later, as sunset washed the desert in amber and gold, Ilyra Crowmoor stood on the veranda of Fort Buchanan's headquarters, watching Holt's soldiers escort the Apache captives onto the parade ground. The negotiations had been tense, edged with threat and pride, but they had ended in her favor. Holt faced her stiffly, frustration barely contained. You understand the terms, Mrs. Crowmoor, he said. You take full responsibility for these individuals. If they return to the reservation, you guarantee compliance with every regulation. And if they vanish, he added, letting the warning hang. I understand my obligations perfectly, Colonel, Ilyra replied, her tone cool and authoritative. And I trust you understand that Malric Dorn will receive my complete account of this incident. The implication landed. Holt's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. The army exists to protect civilians. I hope you don't come to regret your charitable instincts. As custody was formally transferred, Ilyra betrayed none of the tension coiled inside her. Senai, the elder healer, met her gaze with eyes shaped by decades of endurance. The 2 children clung to him, frightened but unbroken. My wagon is ready, Ilyra told them gently. We leave at once. The road from Fort Buchanan to Calixo Mora's trading post passed in taut silence. Ilyra stayed alert for pursuit, every sense tuned for ambush. She had arranged for Brack Holloway to meet them with extra guards, trusted men from Crowmoor Range who did not question her commands. The escort served its purpose, to maintain the appearance that she was returning the Apache to the reservation under supervision. In truth, a different design had been set in motion days earlier. Night had fully fallen when they reached the trading post. Calixo himself was waiting, his expression grave but prepared. "Everything is ready, Senora," he said quietly. "Your private coach is prepared. The supplies have been delivered as instructed. Your agent at Silver Queen completed all transactions." "Thank you, Calixo," Ilyra replied. "Your discretion won't be forgotten." The transfer was swift. The elders and children moved from the wagon into the enclosed carriage as fresh horses were hitched. The coach departed toward Tucson, as planned. Ilyra and Brack, however, turned away, guiding their small party along rough ground, terrain familiar to those who had spent years moving unseen through the territory's hidden routes. Miles beyond the trading post, in a secluded valley known only to the Ashwind kin and a handful of allies, Vaelor waited with Rauk and the Ashwind Circle. When Ilyra arrived with the freed captives, the reunion was fierce and quiet all at once, joy threaded with the knowledge that this victory was only temporary. As the Apache gathered their elders and children, Vaelor led Ilyra aside beneath tall cottonwoods. "You kept your word," he said simply. "Few whites ever have." "I'm not most," she answered with a faint smile. "And I had reasons, practical as well as personal." His gaze searched her face. "The arrangement you proposed, the supply line through Calixo, you've already put it in motion." She nodded. "The first shipments of medicine and food are already en route. Tor and Vex set up a shell company at Silver Queen. On paper, it's mining equipment and provisions. Everything looks clean." "And the cost?" Vaelor asked. "Less than what I was losing to raids," Ilyra replied evenly, "and far less than what open war would cost. Peace is good business, Vaelor." His smile acknowledged both the truth of her words and the deeper motive beneath them. "And Holt?" "He'll be reassigned within the month," Ilyra said quietly. "The governor was very attentive when I mentioned how hostage-taking might alarm investors back east. New York, Boston. Military excess frightens capital." Vaelor shook his head in disbelief. "You achieved in days what we couldn't in years of resistance." "Different weapons for different battles," Ilyra said. "Your raids kept your people alive. This may keep them alive longer." "My methods may help them endure," Ilyra said. They stood together in the hush that followed, both aware that what they had set in motion had shifted the balance of the territory. Where there had once been only bloodlines and battle lines, there were now openings, dangerous, fragile, but real. "What happens now?" Vaelor asked at last. The question carried more than logistics. It held the weight of choice. Ilyra's gaze drifted to the circle of firelight where Ashwind kin reunited, elders embraced, and the Cinderborn laughed softly, then returned to the man beside her, the warrior who had become far more than an ally. "That depends," she said quietly, "on whether certain boundaries can truly be crossed." Vaelor stepped closer, his fingers finding hers in the dark. "Some already have." "Society would never," she began. "I'm not asking society," he said gently. "I'm asking you, Ilyra Crowmoor." The simplicity of it stripped away every excuse. "There's land," she said slowly, "in northern Mexico. I bought it years ago as an investment. A fertile valley. Water rights secured, far from army patrols, far from tribal wars." Understanding sparked in his eyes. "Neutral ground." "More than that," she corrected. "A beginning." She spoke as the vision sharpened. Brack Holloway could manage C-Bar W. Crowmoor trade, and the Silver Queen could finance a new operation, legitimate, cross-border, supplies moving north to the reservations, cattle and silver moving south. And at the center, she finished, a ranch for those who live between worlds. The idea settled between them, bold, perilous, undeniable, It won't be easy, Vaelor said, though hope had already taken root. The border doesn't erase hatred. Nothing worth building ever is, Ilyra replied, but together, we can do what neither of us could alone. He tightened his grip on her hand. Together. When he drew her close, their kiss beneath the stars was no longer stolen or forbidden. It was a vow, unspoken, unrecorded, but absolute. 6 months later, Ilyra stood on the veranda of a hacienda nestled in a green valley 3 days south of the border. Adobe walls and timber beams blended Mexican tradition with American comfort. Beyond them, corrals and barns rose, built by hands from both sides of the line. The trading company, registered cleanly in Tucson and Mexico City, had already earned a reputation for reliability. Few knew its founder now lived here. Fewer still knew her partner was once called the Apache Ghost. Vaelor joined her, the ease between them earned through shared labor and shared risk. No church had sanctified their bond, no court had recognized it. Yet they lived as husband and wife in every way that mattered. The first families arrive tomorrow, he said. Rauch reports they crossed without trouble. Brack's supply shipment reached Hermosillo yesterday, Ilyra replied. Everything's moving as planned. As the sun set, she thought of the empire she'd left behind, and the one she was building now. Seabar W thrived under Brack's hand. The Silver Queen produced steadily, but none of it compared to the peace she'd found here. They had built a sanctuary where difference meant strength, where survival gave way to living. Any regrets? Vaelor asked softly. She turned to him, reading in his eyes the same certainty she felt. Not one, she said, though I never imagined this path. To exile? He asked, a trace of his old dry humor returning. To home, she answered, leaning into him as the first stars appeared. Bright, unconfined, unafraid. Together they had forged a new empire, not of land or power, but of shared purpose and respect. And as night settled over the valley, Ilyra Crowmoor and Vaelor stood at the edge of a future neither had dared to imagine, living proof that even in a world defined by borders, the human heart could still find freedom. This is a story about courage, not the kind of courage forged on battlefields, but the kind required to open one's heart in a world designed to keep it sealed shut. Ilyra Crowmoor and Vaelor were born on opposite sides of history, divided by bloodlines, broken treaties, and generations of silence. And yet together, they proved that love does not recognize borders, does not kneel to injustice, and never asks permission to exist. They did more than find one another. They built something entirely new, a home for those who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once, a place shaped by choice, not conquest, by compassion, not fear. May this story stand as a reminder that true strength lives in empathy, in the willingness to listen, and in the courage to love across every divide. Even in the harshest lands, where the wind carries old grief and the dust remembers pain, love can still take root and bloom. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.